Bonjour et bienvenue. Je m'appelle Margie McIlvaine, et j'enseigne le français ici. I teach French here, and I have been teaching languages for 20 years-ish as I homeschooled my own children. And it's one of my passions that I believe God has given me, and I love to impart that passion to my students. My background is one of my favorites because I took this picture. This you can see behind my finger, that's the spire of Notre Dame before it burned. So this is this is looking in Paris at the Seine, and I just like to play with backgrounds. So I want to tell you about my classes a little bit. The question I get, because my classes are entitled French 1 and French 2 with a difference. And next year, if I have students, we'll add a French 3. But what is the difference? What makes it different from other French courses? Because there are all sorts of French courses. I learned in school Spanish and then French and German. I've studied quite a few languages, very traditionally. And I loved it. I actually love grammar. I love studying how you can take apart a language. That appeals to me, but everybody doesn't love that. In the years I've been teaching, while I homeschooled my kids, I noticed that 5-ish% of my students got it when I taught that traditional way. They absorbed it, they loved it, and they learned very well. About half of the rest could do the exercises and get the grades, and I always tried to make it fun for my students. But they were more following a pattern, and many did not know what they were saying. They just could follow the pattern correctly of the exercises and read the dialogues. Below that, some certain percentage really struggled and never got it. And my heart was always to help those students, because I knew if you dropped them into a French-speaking country, they would learn the language. It is possible to learn language. What could I do to change that? And then I found a different method, about 5 or 7 years ago. It's called TPRS and CI. TPRS stands for Teaching Proficiency Through Reading and Storytelling, and CI means Comprehensible Input. And I thought this would work for my class. And then I found a curriculum written by a mom who has a degree in teaching and has been teaching in the public schools before she started homeschooling her kids. And she developed this curriculum using this method. And I explored it for a year, and bam, my students excelled. Even my dyslexic students, I have a daughter who's dyslexic, I taught her Spanish the old way, it did not work. We did this new way, and she excelled. And by the time she went to college and took French, she aced it. So one of the main differences is the traditional way you learn grammar first. You learn the parts of speech, you conjugate the verbs, and you put the sentences together. And then you learn how to do your indirect objects and your direct objects, etc., etc. So this is how I learned. It's how most of traditional school learn, and that often yields you 10 years later, 20 years later, like my dad, who could remember in German only, "Would you hold my cheese sandwich?" You know, a phrase here and there, but you hear it all the time. I don't remember a thing. This is different. We start with the most commonly used structures in the language: verbs, indirect objects, etc., etc. And we use them in stories. We add motions, skits that include the meaning. And so in the very first class, your students will probably write a story. I will write it for them, but they will direct what happens. And after that class, they'll be able to read it, French, copy work, write it, maybe even retell it. French pronunciation is probably the most difficult thing about French. And the second week, if they want to do a different story and talk about a mean evil kitten who went to Toys R Us, I know they're not around anymore, to find a friend, we will just do went, and we will learn il est allé. He went, without having to conjugate and learn and memorize all the conjugations of all the present tense. We can just say he went. Those conjugations and that discrete grammar will come later, but we just use whole language and it sticks in the brain, and the students become proficient much, much more quickly. And that carries on all the way through. So the class time is different because we're not doing exercises. We do a lot of conversation, we do culture, we do music, we do reading, we bring in extra novels completely in French that are made for French learners. The vocabulary is a little sheltered. They're usually pretty engaging, but the grammar isn't, and it's really complex grammar, and your students are reading it and doing all the things that reading good language produces in the brain. It's really a wonderful method that yields a lot of proficiency, and it's kind of fun. One extra thing for French that I do in all of this, but it's really important for French. Like I said, the pronunciation is usually the most difficult. And so every week I assign songs, worship songs, hymns, popular songs in France or Canada that are appropriate. And the students, songs they like that have French covers, and the students listen to these every week. There's usually a song a week or two. Watching the words, and this helps their pronunciation and rhythm. And I have many other resources where we use native speakers during the week while they are not in class with me to improve their hearing, their rate, to hear different voices and pronunciation. That has been very helpful. I hear their pronunciation take off, and I'm very proud of my students. So I would love to see you, have you email me if you have any other questions. And au revoir, à bientôt, oui, merci.